We haven't lost anybody yet, have we? All right, remember, never leave a fallen comrade, even here. It can be tough. Okay, so we're going to close out today with one of my favorite generals, but I knew him first when he was the commander of 2nd Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division, Rock of the Marne. You heard him sing his division song. And he led the charge to Baghdad, all the way from Kuwait, all the way into Baghdad International Airport. He's led at every level throughout 34 years in our Army, West Point class of 1980. Wonderful individual. One of the few colonels I know who's been in combat that has been awarded the Silver Star while fighting with his troops. Ended up commanding the 4th Infantry Division during a tough time of transition, during Iraqi freedom. Was at Multinational Force Iraq as their spokesman, is also helping the transition. And then he started teaching, again, because he's done that throughout his career as our commanding general of the Combined Arms Center down at Fort Leavenworth. And then as the chief reached down and said, I want to bring a young, energetic guy to command TRADOC, because we're going to change the way we do training and think about leader development. And he picked General Dave Perkins. So let's give him a rounding welcome here. I'm sure you're going to be thrilled with him. Dave?
Well, good evening all. And I realize that I am the, I guess I'm your last official event for your time here down at VMI, and that this is a post-dinner event as well, so I'm well aware of the challenges that both of those present. But we want our leaders to be agile and adaptive, so hopefully we'll strive to meet those challenges. And General Cody, with his extraordinarily generous remarks, said that TRADOC is really sort of the architect of the future of the Army, and we get very involved in that. And one of the projects that we're working on for the Chief and the Secretary of the Army is Force 2025. I know for a lot of you that sounds like a long way away. To old folks like us, that's really tomorrow. And in the cycle of palms and modernization, that really is tomorrow. And then we have another project working, Force 2025 and beyond. So I was trying to decide what I was going to talk to you all about here this evening, looking at what you had covered so far in extraordinary couple of days here, and said, well, I could talk to him about Force 2025 or Force 2030, 2040, 2050, but what I think I'll talk to you about is Force 2014, which is when I believe you're all going to be lieutenants, right? So I figure that might have a little bit more applicability to you of what's going to happen in 2014 to the Army, which to some of you may seem like a distant future, however months you have till graduation, but it will go by very quickly. But what I thought I'd do is talk about, I could say, what the Army expects of you as a lieutenant, because that came up. I sat in some groups today, and I was asking what are their concerns as they become lieutenant and as they become commissioned in the Army, and it revolves around, well, what do my soldiers expect of me, what my platoon sergeant, how am I going to interact with them? You know, I'm just going to be a second lieutenant. I'm not really going to know very much. How am I going to sort of do well with my troops and all those kind of things? So I thought I would talk about that, being a lieutenant. But I'll tell you, I will talk to you tonight. I'll mention sort of 3 things to focus on. But I could have given this same pitch last week to a bunch of general officers at a general officer development seminar. General Cody and I were talking at dinner to a bunch of outstanding young cadets here, and said, you know, you will continue to be developed continually your entire time in the Army. This is just one example of how we invest so heavily in you, because of, quite honestly, as I said, I'm going to talk about the future of the Army. Well, you're the future of the Army. And I will tell you why we're investing in you, and quite honestly, what we expect of you, regardless of where you're going, regardless of what your branch is, whether you're active, reserve, guard, whatever component that is. And so there are 2 things. I only have 4 slides. So I realize again that the environment is post-dinner. It's the last event. You probably had at least 1 or 2 slides this week while you've been here. So I will focus just on these 4 slides, and one is the intro slide here. And most of them actually are pictures and or videos. For you folks going to the Armor Corps, I know words are a challenge. So I speak that as a proud former Armor officer myself. So I figured that words and videos may be useful as well. 2 things I want to point out up here, though, with regards to the Army. The first thing is, I think you're all very familiar with the seal of the Department of the Army, very historical, a lot of historical components of it. You can see the date here, 1775. As you are all, I think, well aware, the birthday of the Army is 14 June 1775. The birthday of our nation is 4 July 1776. So as I always remind folks, I was talking to a number of SCSs yesterday, I reminded them that you are coming into a profession, you are coming into an institution, that you need to understand that the United States Army is 1 year older than the United States of America. The Army that you are going into is older than the nation it serves. That the United States of America was founded on the shoulders of the United States Army and its soldiers. With George Washington and his men at Yorktown, Valley Forge, all those places, our country would not exist were it not for the United States Army. And that's not to take anything away from our sister services, who are a vital element of what we do in the joint arena. But you are entering, when you take that oath, I know you've had a level of commitment in ROTC, but when you take that oath as lieutenant, you are entering an institution 1 year older than the nation that it serves. You are a foundational element of this country and of our way of life. And the day that the United States Army does not meet its obligations, meaning you, is the day that our nation ceases to exist as you and I know it now. And that is not an overstatement. And I think a lot of times when folks come into the Army, they don't understand not only the history and the legacy, but the importance of what the Army has meant to our nation, both in the past and in the future, and quite honestly, not just our nation, but the majority of the free world as people know it now. So that is sort of one of the things that leaders need to do, as I tell folks, is they need to contextualize what it is they're talking about. So this is part of the contextualization, because I'm going to talk to you today about the Army. So this is part of my effort to contextualize the Army by putting it in context with regards to the United States of America. The other point I want to bring here, you see this word compels. And you're going to see some examples. I'm going to talk about examples of compelling. That, again, we belong to a great joint force, and we have great joint partners up there. We have other domains that the United States military operates in. We have the air domain, the maritime domain, the cyber domain. I think a lot of you had great discussions about that. And we obviously, we have the space domain, and we operate primarily in the land domain, okay? We are the preeminent land power in the world. Our goal is to dominate in the land domain. But one of the unique things about the land domain, not to be overly parochial, is in the other domains, we work on convincing people. We want to convince you to give up your power in this regime. We want to convince you not to invade this country. We want to convince you to withdraw from invading this country. And so the elements that we bring to bear in air and space and maritime, cyber and all that, they try to convince people to do things. But in the end, if the convincing doesn't work and we actually have to compel them to do something, you generally only can compel people to do things on land. People talk about standoff capability, and I love standoff capability. Smart munitions, those are all great. But sometimes if you want to compel somebody, you have to have what I call stand-on capability. And the smartest weapon system out there on the battlefield is a soldier with a rifle. You and your soldiers are the absolute smartest, most lethal, and most discriminate weapon system that our vast arsenal has in the U.S. military. You know, during Desert Storm, when Saddam invaded Kuwait, and since then we had, you know, we drove him out of Kuwait, and then we had no-fly zones and Northern Watch and various, usually over the holiday period, shock and awe things that would occur when he would get out of line. And we kept trying to convince Saddam that he needed to change his ways and that, if need be, sort of step down from power. But that convincing never worked until finally the United States Army, not with standoff capability, but with stand-on capability, stood in Baghdad, and some 4th Infantry Division soldiers pulled his butt out of a hole in the ground. And they said, we've been trying to convince you to give up, but now we are compelling you to give up. And so that is the job the United States Army is in. We're in the job of compelling our will, the will of the United States of America, on anybody that our political leaders want our will compelled upon. And we will utilize all the other domains to our best of ability, but in the end they are generally limited to their ability to convince. But in the end, when we absolutely want something to happen, we know one of you or your soldiers are actually going to have to go there with stand-on capability and make it happen. That becomes messy, it becomes dangerous, it is very complicated, and so this standoff convincing argument tends to be something that people sort of latch onto and they like, and if it works, great. But we must never lose sight of the fact that in the end, the organization that is 1 year older than the nation that we serve, we are in the business of compelling people to do things that generally they do not want to do, which means it is very tough, and it is could be, you know, the most difficult kind of job that ends up on your plate. And at the point of compulsion, you know what usually is at the point of compulsion? It's generally not a general. It is usually a lieutenant, a sergeant, maybe a captain. At the very point of compulsion, we're trying to compel our will, it is usually not a general. It's usually a lieutenant, some great soldiers, non-commissioned officers, etc. like that. You tend to be the fine tip of point of compulsion. Next slide. So, 3 things I want to focus on here. Anyone here going into the chaplain corps? Any budding chaplains? Anybody in seminary? Not yet. Okay, all right. Well, you know, if you talk to my good friends, the chaplains, they say, well, if you're going to give a sermon, what you do, everything is in 3s. You tell them what you're going to say, you say it, and then you told them what you said, and then you can't cover any more than 3 topics. So, you know, everything's sort of a short guard. Don't cover more than 3 topics, and tell them what you're going to say it, and then tell them what you've said. So, number 1, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to talk about. And then there are 3 things. 1, leadership. It's kind of going to be the overarching aspect of it. And then with regards to what do we want lieutenants to do and what do leaders do, one of it is we are going to talk about one of the things that leaders do is sort of set priorities and sort of determine when something has reached crisis mode. What's a high priority, what's a low priority, when it's a problem, when it's not a problem. One of the key things leaders do is determine in an organization, you work the rheostat. What's a problem, what's not a problem, when am I in crisis mode, when we are not in crisis mode. And then the other thing with regards to that is, as I said, leadership. What's a crisis? Who's going to determine that? Setting what the priorities are, and then I'll come back and we'll cover that. So, setting the stage here. This is a map of Baghdad. So these 3 examples that I'm going to talk about are going to be examples of lieutenants, generally sergeants and soldiers. And so those are my sort of 3 favorite people in the Army. Lieutenants, sergeants and soldiers, sometimes captains. It depends. And you got to keep an eye on them. But definitely lieutenants, soldiers, okay, and sergeants. Because again, they're at the pointy tip of the spear of compulsion. So this is a map of Baghdad. This is sort of downtown Baghdad, the regime district. And this particular brigade was attacking up into Baghdad, and there were three objectives here, and these objectives really maintain the lines of communication open going to the main attack route into Baghdad. These were bridge overpasses, because these were the bridges. This is kind of a divided highway. These are the overpasses that you could intersect the lines of communication, the avenue of approach, as this armored brigade went into downtown Baghdad. And so it was determined that these had to be secured, because if you could secure these overpasses, then it would be difficult for the enemy to interdict. And if an armored brigade's going to go in here, all of its supplies and rearm and refit, all that is out here. And so they've got to go in and out of the city. And what we did not want to have is, and I'll come back to this, we did not want to have another situation like Mogadishu, where we had American soldiers in the city and then they were cut off. And we couldn't get medevac to them, or we couldn't get supplies to them, whatever. So the key is going into a heavily built up area, city of 6 million people, that you had to have lines of communication open. So these were key, that these had to remain open. And so these were defended here by great infantrymen and actually infantrymen and mechanics, a chaplain, support personnel, etc., so that the main armored column could go in. And a number of the things I'm going to talk about today occurred right down here at Objective Curly. Quite honestly, the concern was in downtown Baghdad with this intersection here, because this is the airport out here, very complicated intersection. And this really was sort of the least of our concerns. It was the closest to the rear area here of the brigade. So it was an economy of force mission with 40 soldiers. 40 American soldiers from an infantry battalion were there, but it was a mixture of really subordinate units within it. We had part of a support platoon there. We had some mechanics that were there. The battalion command sergeant major was there, making sure the logistics flow was working properly. Medevac flow was working as he should. And we had a platoon of infantrymen with them. So we had a total combined arms thing, but you didn't even have an entire infantry company, 40 soldiers, including M88 folks, communications signal folks, and a platoon of infantry, and the command sergeant major was there. And then we had a captain out of the battalion staff that was, call it Task Force Zahn. He was a captain there, kind of running that. So economy of effort, but great Americans, great soldiers, and did a great job. But what you're going to see occurred down here. Now, in fact, let's go to the next slide first. Okay, this is going to be the first lesson learned. Understand what determines a crisis. So what happened was, they were at this intersection. You'll see pictures of it. It was a bridge intersection. And the enemy had determined what we had determined as well, that these intersections are key. It was key terrain, that you could interdict the attack here. And there was an NBC News crew embedded with them. So this NBC News crew there with not the real high-speed cameras, everything, just kind of going along for the ride, thinking not a lot was going to happen here, because they were kind of waiting to get into Baghdad. And so there was an NBC News camera there, crew, with one of these shoulder-held cameras, sort of battlefield camera kind of setups. And what happened at this place with 40 American soldiers is that they were attacked by a combination of Fedayeen, some Special Republican Guard, and other sort of paramilitary groups there. And the enemy's size was between 300 to 400. 300 to 400 Fedayeen, Special Republican Guard folks had surrounded these 40 American soldiers. So almost a fair fight. Things still were in our favor. So you have 40 American soldiers surrounded by, and you'll see the terrain, by 300 to 400 enemy folks. There's a very intense firefight going on there, not only for their lives, but obviously for the sanctity and the integrity of the line of communication there. And so a number of things were happening there, and this NBC News crew just fortuitously happened to be there. And so you'll see this cameraman is just running around the battlefield, so it's not this high-speed, stabilized picture or anything, and he didn't really know what was going on, so he's just seeing activity going back and forth. So this is the first thing that I'm talking about, and it was an NBC News crew, and then the film got back, and they've edited it, and you'll hear some folks talking over. But a couple of points I want to make here. The first one, this is an M88, is a tank recovery vehicle you may be familiar with. This person right here is the battalion command sergeant major. The battalion command sergeant major, mechanized infantry battalion, was riding in the M88 with the mechanics to make sure that they could get where they had to get to the battlefield and work in logistics, etc., like that. And they are surrounded by enemy, and they're fighting them off. So the command sergeant major, you can see with M16, we didn't have the high-speed M4s, anything yet, with his M16, and he has been shot in the leg. But, you know, when you only have 40 people, every person counts, and so he is still maintaining, you know, a high rate of fire, accurate fire, etc., like that, defending, while the medic is there cutting open the pant leg, working on his leg, but the sergeant major is still continuing to fight, you know, protecting not only sort of his immediate crew, but the folks that are there. Okay, the rest of the story is, so this is Command Sergeant Major Bob Gallagher. In a previous life, Staff Sergeant Bob Gallagher was in Mogadishu many years before that. And any of you seen the movie Black Hawk Down? Yeah. Remember the QRF force and the Humvees that were trying to get into the helicopters? The NCOIC of that QRF force, the Humvees, was Staff Sergeant Bob Gallagher. Okay, so Staff Sergeant Bob Gallagher is now Command Sergeant Major Bob Gallagher, and once again he is surrounded by the enemy. In Mogadishu he received the Purple Heart and Silver Star. In OIF-1 he received the Purple Heart and the Silver Star once again. So first of all, that's the kind of non-commissioned officers that you are about to inherit when you become a platoon leader. So he's there fighting this off and really not even pausing or losing a beat as the medic is working on his leg. And so if you could play the video, and I'll highlight a couple of other points. And hopefully we're not a captive to technology.
Slowly. We thought we were taking fire mainly from one direction originally, and then it started letting up from other areas. What's interesting about the videotape is you don't hear 9/10 of the small arms fire that was coming in. It just doesn't pick it up.
Here's this other
The
shot
other
that
thing
I
you
found
don't
amazing.
appreciate,
This is the man with the wounded leg who's going to go ahead and take position even as the medic is treating him.
They don't know that's
that is Bob Gallagher. I think that's his third Purple Heart. His last one was in Mogadishu in the now famous incident.
And looks like he took some prisoners as well.
Yes, quite a few prisoners were taken. They were interrogated. We had an interpreter on site, and we found out that many of these people were Syrian mujahideen, RPG teams trained in Syria and volunteering to come here and make holy war. They weren't even Iraqis, although we know that there were Iraqis involved as well. There was Iraqi artillery.
Okay, if you just go to the next slide. Another point here, I have it on the film clip, we just didn't load it up there. It kind of gets back to sort of what is a crisis. And so here you have Command Sergeant Major Gallagher saying, okay, we're surrounded, 440, I'm shot in the leg, but it's sort of still continue mission. You know, we're going to still continue on. In the same place, there's a video by the same crew, very kind of choppy like that, with a soldier under, you can see it's in the bridge abutment, it's very complex terrain. Small arms and mortars flying all around, is a Specialist Carson. And the NBC News crew comes up to him, and Specialist Carson is lying there with a medic working on him, and he's been shot in the hand and he's been shot in the leg. And then his hand is bandaged up, etc. like that, and in his leg, not to be gratuitous here, but again, they have cut open his pants legs, and the medics are working on him, and there's a bullet has gone through his leg and is sticking out. And you can see at his leg, there's a bullet halfway sticking out his leg, has already gone through. So one arm has a bullet hole in it, the other one, there's a bullet still in his leg sticking out. The medics are working on him. He's not at a Ford surgical hospital, it's the medics, okay? The medics that are there, or maybe a combat lifesaver, working on him in this bridge abutment, surrounded by enemy. You know, he's outnumbered 10-1. And so the NBC News crews comes up to him, and they're talking to him, and they're like, what happened? He says, well, I was out there, all this small arms fire came in, I got shot, etc. like that. Then the camera pans, he's got a shot, and he's got a hole in the hand, the bullet's still in the leg. And they're like, well, you know, so what do you think? He says, you know what? He says, it's not as bad as you think. He said, it's not as bad as you think. You know, so he said, you know, I've got a bullet in me still. I'm not sure where we're going to get up. There's no surgeons there. Got a hole in my hand, but it's not as bad as you think. And the reporter asked him something else, was kind of muffled. He goes, I'll be all right. Don't worry about me. He says, I'll be all right. I'll be fine. And so he said, I'll be fine. Everything will be good. Well, first of all, I tell folks that I work with, I said, so when you come to me and you tell me that we have a crisis at work or whatever it is, what I use to determine whether or not it really is a crisis is the Specialist Carson Sergeant Major Gallagher metric. So their metric is, I have a hole in my hand and a bullet in my leg and everything is fine. So I tell folks that work for me, so unless you have more than 2 bullets in you and are surrounded and outnumbered 10 to 1, we don't have a crisis. We sort of have a challenge, and we're going to work through this because, see, I know some soldiers who literally have been shot twice, and they're just continuing on with the mission. I know a command sergeant major who has a hole in his leg, is surrounded by the infantry, and is still keeping them off, is still continuing his mission. So, see, I know there are people in the Army that can operate under pretty stressful conditions. And so I know my organization, whatever it is, that we can work through this. We're going to be able to solve this problem. Because that's one of the first things that a leader does, is determine when is it that we can't get our job done. At what point have the requirements put upon me exceeded the capacity of my unit? And I can tell you what, after 34 years in the Army has never given any unit I've been with any mission that eventually we couldn't get done. It had nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with Command Sergeant Major Gallagher, Specialist Carson, and you're going to see Private Nauman here, because the Army has always given me, and it has nothing to do with you have a huge budget, do you have the newest version of ISR, do you have the newest this? No, all I need are good soldiers. Okay, I need good soldiers. I need the backbone of the Army, the non-commissioned officers. So I need to have very well-trained and well-disciplined non-commissioned officers, and I have to have great soldiers, and then we'll get the job done. And that's all it counts, because I've seen it. So again, somebody comes to me with a problem. Hey, sir, we don't have enough time. We don't have enough money. We don't have enough people. I'm like, let me call Sergeant Major Gallagher. Let me call Specialist Carson. Let me get a readout. Let me see how bad this situation really is. That's the first thing a leader has to determine. Okay, when are you in a crisis mode, and when have the Army requirements exceeded the expectation of you personally or your unit to get the job done? Because then people need to know that. That's not to say you don't come back and outline the complications and the risk. I'll talk about that. That's very important. But I'm telling you, my experience is generally people will push the in case of crisis button much sooner than it needs to be pushed. In my experience in leading United States Army soldiers, United States Army soldiers generally have a much higher tolerance for dealing with a challenge than a lot of leaders give them credit for. Now, you've got to invest in them, you've got to train them, you have to take care of them, but they have a pretty high tolerance for getting the job done in the most difficult of circumstances. Okay, the next thing here, managing risk. That's what we ask leaders to do, really. That you will spend a lot of your time managing risk. Earlier today, I was in the seminar where we talked about Anaconda and what was going on with the SEALs and the Army Rangers and all that. It was one of those, what do you do next, squad leader, putting our young cadets here in the situation, what decision do you make? And really, it was all, those of you in it, it was all about, there was never an easy solution, right? It was all about how much risk do I take? Risk to the mission, risk to my soldiers, risk to this, risk to that. And so that's what we do as leaders. And I'll tell you, as you get promoted to higher and higher ranks, you just spend more and more of your time managing risk. Because generally at the lieutenant level, we try to, generally speaking, except for, in some very difficult combat situations, try to give you all that you need. If your platoon is supposed to have this many people, we try to resource it, at least the 90% level. We try to make sure you have a platoon sergeant and all these various things like that. But as you get higher in rank, you are given more and more ambiguous issues, less and less resources, and it's sort of all about managing risk. Now, so how do you do that? How do you manage risk? Well, one thing I always remind people is if you read Army doctrine, my little plug, I'm the Training and Doctrine Command commander, so I can't not mention doctrine while I'm here. ADP 6.0, Army Doctrine Publication 6.0, Mission Command. What we say is we encourage prudent risk-taking. We encourage risk-taking. So when I used to be at the Command General Staff College or SAM, School of Advanced Military Studies, our real smart folks, they would lay out courses of action to me and say, sir, we recommend this one because there's little to no risk. I said, well, actually, that is a doctrinally incorrect course of action. A course of action with no risk is a doctrinally incorrect course of action. In fact, what our doctrine says is we want you to take the very maximum risk that is prudent. Because any of you here are finance majors? I know there's at least one of them, and he was going armor. Okay, another one here. Okay, so right in finance, isn't it all about sort of managing risk and in hopes of big gain, payoff at the other end? Well, sort of life is like that, and in warfare it's like that. And many times as you have opposing forces, if you look at history of warfare, it is the commander that could take the most risk and mitigate it. Notice I didn't say a gamble. I didn't say imprudent risk. Words have meanings. I've learned that since I write the doctrine now for the Army. Words have meanings. Prudent risk. We encourage prudent risk-taking. Lack of risk, remember this, lack of risk is a doctrinally incorrect course of action. So prudent risk. What determines if it is prudent risk or random risk or a gamble? A couple of things. One, level of training. Does your unit know how to do what they're doing? If they don't, that might be imprudent. So level of training has a lot to do with how much risk you're going to take. If you're highly trained, you can probably do you can do more complicated operations. You can operate, if you've never operated at night and you can conduct a major raid at night, that could be imprudent. So level of training has to do with determining whether something is prudent risk. You'll notice as I talk through this, the level of risk has very little to do with the event itself. The level of risk has pretty much everything to do with you. Not the event, with you and your unit. So again, first determine whether it's prudent or not. Are your soldiers well trained or not? Nothing to do with the mission at hand. Second thing, do you have mitigating criteria? Do you have a quick reaction force? Do you have medics, et cetera, like that? Third thing, the level of commitment that your soldiers have to their chain of command and to each other and to getting the mission done. This gets back to sort of, and I'll talk about at the end, sort of esprit de corps, morale, whatever you want to talk about it. But if you have a positive command climate where soldiers are willing to do whatever it takes to save another soldier's life or to get the job done, that has a huge determinant on whether about what you're about to do is prudent or not. Then the last thing is you do have to weigh this cost-benefit thing. That if you're doing something very dangerous, what happened, and here's the problem that sometimes people get into. They say, well, this is very dangerous. What if this happens? What if this happens? What if this happens? And those are all true. The other thing you have to take a look at is, but what if you don't do it? There's always all kinds of challenges. What if I do this mission? And you can line those out, and we tend to be captivated by those. What we don't spend as much time on is, yeah, but what if I don't do the mission? What is the risk there? What is the risk of inaction? Okay, action has risk. What is the risk of inaction? Because the risk of inaction may be equally as imprudent. So it's all of these things that you have to weigh, which you can see it's very situational. You know, that definite answer, you know, it depends. You know, what's a risky mission? Well, it depends. And you can see all things I talked about really have nothing to do with the mission itself. It pretty much has to do with you, your leadership, your training, understanding the big picture, understanding why you're doing this, why are you taking this risk, is it worth it, what happens if you don't take it, has nothing to do with the mission itself, really. What has to do with the mission itself is balancing that against your level of training, balancing the mission itself against the risk of not doing anything. So in this case, this is what was going on with a specialist. I told you my favorite people are soldiers, sergeants, and lieutenants, okay? So here we got a specialist, a staff sergeant, and this unit is led by a lieutenant, support platoon leader. I'm not going to talk anything about generals or colonels here today, okay? Because I'm not doing deep future. I'm talking about Army 2014. 2014, that's your Army. You're going to be a lieutenant, you're going to have sergeants, and you're going to have soldiers. But I said I could give this briefing to a bunch of generals because it's still about lieutenants, sergeants, and soldiers. So this element, led by a lieutenant, was a rearm and refuel convoy. As you remember, going up the road to Baghdad. And you remember the objectives were named Mo, Larry, and Curly. Okay, so even in the heart of battle, Army planners, those my planners on the brigade staff, young captains, have a sense of humor. But actually more than that, it's all about sort of thinking through how do we minimize risk and simplicity. So think about, what if the objectives were like green, amber, and fuchsia? First of all, would you remember them? And then second of all, which one's in which order? Was the green one the first one, amber, fuchsia, like this? But Mo, Larry, Curly, everyone knows that's the order they go in, right? Mo, Larry, Curly. So see the genius in that? Mo, Larry, Curly, you're not even going to forget which one is which one. So the northern one is Mo, okay? And there was a mechanized infantry company there, mechanized infantry company, 2 platoons of Bradley fighting vehicles and a platoon of M1A1 tanks. If you are unfamiliar with the basic load of a mechanized infantry company, to get into the detailed explanation of it, it's a lot of bullets. Okay, where's the armor guy going? How many tanks, how many bullets in the coax of an M1 tank? Anyone? 10,000. It's 10,000 per tank. Okay, that company went black on ammo. Okay, platoon of tanks and 2 platoons of Bradleys. So that's a lot of ammunition. You're talking tens of thousands of rounds of small arm, tow missiles, anti-tank weapons, 25 millimeter, 120 millimeter main gun. So as you remember, Mo was that northern objective, and they were black on ammo and about to be overrun. And of course, if you lost Mo, what does that mean to the 1,000 soldiers that were in the middle of Baghdad? You got Mogadishu 2 all over again. So we had to quickly get ammunition up to objective Mo, because that was really the linchpin of the 1,000 soldiers that were in downtown Baghdad. And so we were fighting through at objective Curly, because that was where we were really getting a lot of resistance, and we got the word up that, hey, I think it's clear. Let's send the first rearm and refuel convoy up, R2 convoy. It headed up the road. These are HEMTs. They are made of solid aluminum, okay, aluminum HEMTs. And there's 2 kinds of HEMTs, a fueler and an ammo HEMT, okay? If it's a fueler, it holds 2,500 gallons of fuel, okay, jet fuel, because tanks are turbine engines. So if you're a HEMT driver, if you're a specialist, you get to either get in an aluminum vehicle full of 2,500 gallons of jet fuel or 8 tons of ammo. You choose which one you want. And then once you choose that, then what we ask this lieutenant and these specialists to get in these aluminum HEMTs full of either thousands of gallons of fuel or thousands of gallons or thousands of rounds of ammunition and drive through objective Curly, where the known 400 enemy, but we've got 40 great Americans holding on right now. Because if you don't, the infantrymen of objective Mo are going to run out of ammo, and then they're going to get overrun, and then the 1,000 soldiers in downtown Baghdad will be cut off. And it will be different than Mogadishu, because there's 6 million people in Baghdad. And so this lieutenant took this convoy and went up through objective Curly, and they were ambushed at objective Curly. They were hit, and 8 of their HEMTs were destroyed, okay? Lost 8 of the HEMTs. This platoon sergeant was killed. The lead section sergeant, staff sergeant was killed. A couple of drivers were killed. And now these HEMTs are underneath this bridge. You saw the bridge abutment there of Curly. These HEMTs are underneath it, and they're on fire. And so what you have is a command sergeant major who's there is now wounded. You have a number of other wounded sergeants. Specialist Carson's leaning up against the bridge abutment, wounded. You now have half of the rearm and refuel convoy is literally on fire underneath the bridge crossing, with the platoon sergeant dead, the lead section sergeant dead, a couple of drivers dead, et cetera, like that. And a lieutenant's in charge of this element here. And they knew, though, because again, we're deciding, okay, how much risk are we going to take? In other words, what if I don't get the remaining fuelers and ammo vehicles up to objective Mo? What's going to happen there? So this was part of the risk mitigation measures. But it wasn't just up to the lieutenant, it was up to the specialist, sergeant. Everyone needed to know what was the risk of inaction. Because they knew the risk of doing something. What was the risk of inaction? And so they're there trying to go back to figure out what's going to happen, while literally the lifeblood of the infantry company at Mo is literally going up in flames in front of them. And so as these vehicles are sitting on the road burning, Specialist Valles here realizes that actually a couple of them are not on fire yet. They're not on fire yet. They're only surrounded by others that are on fire. Okay? And what do you think is happening to the ammo carrier that is on fire with 8 tons of tank ammo in it? That starts cooking off. And so small arms start going off, tow missiles start going off, everything else starts going off, shooting out the back of this helmet as well as the others. And then Specialist Valles says, well, I have this helmet here, it's still good to go. If I can just drive through all the burning vehicles and the ammo and the helmets that are cooking off ammo, then maybe that'll sort of rally the troops and we can get back on the road and see if it works. So with no prodding from his superiors, because the lieutenant actually isn't physically at this point, he's up actually with a captain that's in charge of this at the time. A great staff sergeant and a great specialist decide, you know what, this is going to be very risky. I mean, they've done the calculus. Jumping into an aluminum vehicle full of 8 tons of ammo and driving through a cauldron of burning other vehicles with 8 tons of ammo cooking off has an element of risk involved to it. We are violating a number of safety directives. Okay, so there's an element of risk to it. However, they realize the risk of inaction could literally cost thousands of lives. So they put their life at risk to the risk of others. And then this was caught on video, so if we could run the video, please.
Near the end, there were some louder explosions, and the supplies that they brought in were hit. A fuel truck went ablaze. Right next to it, ammo truck, and there were other ammo trucks and fuel trucks. They saved most of them, and I believe there's a shot somewhere.
In fact, it's right here. It's burning, and I think what we want to pause is people will actually hear the ammunition cooking off as one soldier, I guess, tries to move the other ammo truck out of the way.
That's correct. I believe it was Sergeant Joe Todd.
Ammo cooking off.
And at the distance, I think you heard his driver say, "No, Joe, don't." And he told me afterwards it's because he had no children, and he knew that Joe had children, and didn't want him going into it. We knew we had to get out of there in a hurry right about then, because the ammo truck was way too close to us. And about the same time, luckily, Colonel Twitty, who was monitoring the radio, sent in a platoon of Bradleys, and they came just about the right time.
So you can see, what does it possess a young specialist to jump in that thing, and drive it off? Because he determined the gain was worth the risk. He determined that he was well trained. He determined that he was well led. He determined that his commitment to his soldiers and leadership really sort of mattered more than sort of his personal safety there. You don't develop that kind of risk-taking overnight without a lot of personal investment in your specialists and your sergeants, that they're going to do something like that even without you telling them exactly to do it, because he could have just not done it and he would have had no repercussions to him personally whatsoever. I mean, there was no expectation that somebody would put themselves in that level of risk, and I can tell you that was typical of any number of lieutenants, sergeants, and soldiers that made that mission complete. I would tell you that the next day I was in Baghdad, and there was one of these helmets there, and the windshield was riddled with bullets. The whole windshield had nothing but bullets hole in it, and 2 of the tires were flat, and it's sitting in Baghdad, and it was a fueler. And so the specialist was the driver. I kind of walk up to him, and I said, well, I mean, is this your vehicle? He goes, yes, sir. I said, well, how did it get up here? I said, I mean, it's got like 2 flat tires and the entire cab is riddled with bullets. I mean, it doesn't look like literally anyone would survive. He goes, well, here's the deal, sir. He goes, first of all, we knew that those soldiers in the city, they needed the fuel and ammo. They need to have it or else they were probably going to die. And so what we had arranged is, you saw those bridge crossings up to Baghdad? So at the next crossing, as we're coming into it, so we were just Hemets. The plan was they were going to be embedded with the convoy, and then all the attack took place and all that. So they were just by themselves now. Okay, these Hemets with a lieutenant, sergeants, and soldiers. And he said, this is what we had worked out. This plan, we got together, we worked out this plan. Is that at the next bridge crossing, when we came to it, we called to them and we talked to them. And we said, look, we don't have any, embedded gun trucks. We're made out of aluminum, etc. like that. But we got to come up this highway, and you could see all the enemy fire coming down on it. He said, here's what you're going to do. You have tanks and Bradleys up at your objective, and we're bringing ammo up there. So they said, so you turn and head your main guns and 25 Mikes, you head them south towards us. Okay? And then what we're going to do, we're going to stay in the right-hand lane. We will stay in the right-hand lane, because it's a divided highway, 2 lanes north, 2 lanes south. We will stay in the right-hand lane, and then you take everything from our left headlight over. So the passing lane and over, what we want you to do is put a wall of fire of 25mm chain gun ammo, coax ammo, and heat main gun take ammo if you have to. Not the Sabo, because you don't want the discarding pellets here. But heat main gun ammo, and you just suppress from the left headlight over. We'll stay in the right lane. Slow traffic, stay right. And he said, then what we're going to do is we're going to get in our, aluminum helmet, and then we're going to duck down way low behind the windshield, and we'll take our M16s and we'll hang them out the driver's window or the passenger window, because you've got from the left headlight over, so you're shooting at us. I've always thought there'd be something very disconcerting about friendly forces shooting at you. But they said, so you take all this 25 Mike and main gun and you'll shoot at us. You keep the bad guys down this side. We'll shoot our M16s like crazy out the passenger window, and then we'll just stay really low so that when they shoot through the windshield, it just goes right over our head, and we'll drive like this. And so it sounded like a plan. And so the lieutenant and sergeants got together and said that sounds like a plan. And we don't have a lot of time to figure this out. And so work it out with the company that's up there. They worked it out. And so I said, so that's what you did? He said, yes, sir. He says, as long as I stayed below the dashboard, the green tracers were just going into the headrest, and we were good to go. As long as they just kept shooting into the headrest, I was below, and then like this, and I just kind of had to go straight because it's a straight road. And he said, then we just had to go fast, pedal to the metal. So then I talked to the company commander that was at Larry, which is the objective they were coming up to, and they said, yeah, it was the most amazing thing. He said, we just saw these Hemets get on the road, and he said they were going like 50 miles an hour, and they were just hauling butt up that right-hand lane. He said you could see RPGs flying over the top of them, rounds hitting the aluminum and stuff like that, going through the windshield. But he said we just kept plowing our ammo into the median, and they just kept shooting M16 ammo onto the right-hand side, and boom, they made it into Baghdad. And every one of them made it. Now, they were all shot, they had flat tires, all that, but the rest of that convoy made it. Brought the fuel and the ammo and everything like that. Lieutenants, specialists, and sergeants figured this whole thing out. They decided, you know what? That's a risk worth taking, okay? We will, if I could just, again, do I have a plan to mitigate it? Yeah, I'll just sit low. Yeah, that'd be stupid to sit high above the dashboard. That's crazy. You would do it as long as you're below the dashboard, and as long as you make sure the rounds are heading into the headrest, we're good to go. So again, they were, that's prudent risk. In their mind, that was prudent risk because we're good enough. Okay, we can do this. We've coordinated. Okay, and I really trust the marksmanship of those tankers and mechanized infantrymen. I used to complain when we used to have to go out and support tank gunnery and all that stuff because they have a support platoon, they're driving all night with ammo and everything like that. But now I see the wisdom of their ways of being good marksmen. I have a whole new appreciation for tank gunnery now because, see, they're shooting at me. Okay, before when I was behind them and they were shooting that way, I really didn't care what they hit. But now I have a new appreciation for the level of marksmanship since they're shooting at me. So that occurs, and they get up there, and, you know, bring all that up there. And so, again, one of the things that leaders do is you manage risk as a leader. And I told you all those things have to do with risk. Very little of them have to do with the mission itself. Because I think most people, if you say, should we jump into this burning vehicle and drive up there and then have people shoot at us? I mean, that's probably rates pretty high on the risk management scale, right? But then if you mitigate, say, well, I got great soldiers, I got great corporals, I got great sergeants, I got a great lieutenant. We figured this out. The payoff is people die in Baghdad. It's a risk worth taking, and we're going to mitigate it. Okay, next slide. And this is sort of the last slide, last video. So this is private. Again, private. Told you. All right, so what I was going to talk about today is lieutenants. I did talk to you about a couple captains, but it won't be that long before you're a captain. So don't forget any of this when you're a captain. Christopher Nauman, he's wounded out on the road. So you'll see a bunch of his buddies go out with a litter, with a stretcher, and they're carrying him. But they have their M16s, and you know how it is carrying. You probably have done before. You got all your battle rattle on, everything. It's kind of awkward. And so as they were running back, there's, you know, enemy machine gun nests and stuff like that. They start engaging what would be a pretty easy target, which is a wounded soldier on a litter with 4 soldiers with, you know, their gear around their back carrying them. You've all done that before, and it's very awkward. The soldier's heavy because he's got all his gear on, etc. So very difficult for the soldiers carrying the litter to return fire because they've got their hands full and, you know, their weapons are strung over their back. But Private Nauman, again, because he's well trained, well led, and the Army's all about soldiers, sergeants, and lieutenants, says, well, you know, I'm part of this team, I can take care of it. So he's lying on the stretcher, very seriously wounded. His weapon at that point, he had a sawed-off shotgun because we were going to go into Baghdad, city fighting, stuff like that. So he was one of the folks with sawed-off shotguns for, you know, breaching doors and various things like that. So he's lying on the stretcher. So again, kind of, you know, hey, I can mitigate this risk. Not necessarily a crisis. I still have a weapon. And so he's on the stretcher wounded. You will see it. Again, the NBC News crew is just kind of running around. As he's engaged by the enemy, as the other folks are trying to figure out what to do, he just sits up wounded and engages and kills the enemy from the stretcher with a shotgun. And if you could play that video, please. These are just the NBC News crew going around in the day of the life.
For a moment, Craig.
Went on for, I guess, about 5 hours or so, and U.S. forces started to run low on ammo, low on fuel, and they made a decision to put together a convoy to resupply. That convoy had to run a gauntlet of RPG fire. Unfortunately, in that gauntlet, 2 U.S. soldiers were killed by RPG fire.
And we're seeing a soldier here just toss a grenade.
Yes. That was to clear some of the berm areas behind the bridge abutments. I believe the grenades were thrown for. Dismounted soldiers went in and did a very good job of doing that.
Here's Nauman here.
Remember, for many of these soldiers, that was the first time in combat.
And Craig, this is the picture you were talking about. Let's watch the man on the stretcher. Watch what he does. I got to ask you, Craig, did he hit what he was aiming at?
Yes.
So just had to add stretcher gunnery to our gunnery.
This played 5 or 6 hours, but I've seen so many moments just looking at this tape of heroism here and bravery. That's one, and we're going to see some more here in a moment as another, I believe, wounded soldier in just a moment here is being treated.
Yeah, the one he's talking about is Carson. So again, these are privates, sergeants, corporals, all of the leadership of lieutenant, maintenance platoon leader, support platoon leader, something like that. Now, So we've talked a lot about, and as you've gone to leadership classes and all that, we talk what we want you to be. We want you to be a warrior. We want you to be ethical. We want you to be fit. We want you to be resilient. At LDAC, we focus on that. And that's very important. These are what I call threshold capabilities you have to have as a leader. But now you've got to take it to the next step, okay? So you know what you have to do, literally, to be all you can be and what we want you to be, and sort of the threshold limits we want. But now leadership, you've got to take it one step further. If you could put up my last slide, okay? So we're talking to folks, they want to go to school, they want to go to ranger school, they want to do various things like that, and that's all good. We all want you to be the best you can be. But now that you're a leader, really the focus stops becoming you, okay? The issue is now we expect all of this of you. We expect you to be wise, to have adequate skill, to be dedicated, etc. What we're going to start asking you to do is you need to get everyone else up to this level. That's your job now. Okay, our job in ROTC and other pre-commissioning courses, and as you continue on in the military, you'll get professional military education. So we, the institutional Army, we're working on you on this, and we're not done yet. You're going to go to BOLEC and so on like that. But this is your job. You need to start doing this with everybody else. So how are you going to make sure that Private Nauman is skilled enough that he can engage the enemy while wounded lying on a stretcher? Okay? How are you going to make sure that Corporal Vallis is dedicated enough to get into a burning vehicle and drive it through and ensure mission success? Are you going to do it with the level of humility that they want to do it for you because they want to make you successful, they want to accomplish the mission? So this, quite honestly, people think this is hard, and it is. You have to have high standards. But this is key, getting others to do those things. Because now, you know, when you went to LDAC, we graded you. You know, when you're in school, you get a GPA, we're grading you. When you get in the Army, what we're saying is, I don't really care if you're the smartest person in the Army. I don't care if you're the most fit person. I don't care if you're a tactical genius or something like that. But are you making sure, what have you done for your soldiers lately? What have you been doing for your unit lately? Have you risen anyone else's boat with all these skills that you have? And I can tell you, I've seen a lot of great people that are great at this. They're horrible at this. And that is the difference between a leader versus a very skilled soldier. We are paying you to be a leader. And what we want to know is what have you done for others lately, today? So I should have told you there's a test at the end of this. So here's the test. I call it the Private Nauman test. And the video didn't go on. But so Private Nauman gets pulled over to the side. You can see where he was, and he's actually injured very critically. And you can see what the weather conditions are like, whatever. There was no, we were east of the Euphrates River. There was no medevac flying east of the Euphrates River, no medevac. So there was not going to be any medevac. Whether he knew that or not, it just wasn't going to happen. And so he's lying there critically injured, and then that NBC news crews comes up to him. And it was the same guy that's running around and had gone and talked to Carson and everything like that. And the guy said, hey, what's going on? And something like that. So here's this critically injured soldier. I'm sure he has a great mother, maybe a great girlfriend, wife, or whatever, folks he loved. And you might think that folks would say, hey, I'm NBC News, I'm on national media. Who knows what's going to happen to me in a very difficult situation, etc. like that. So I might have just one more chance to get something out to the world, you know, on NBC, national media. So is it, you know, I love you, Mom, or brother, sister, whatever like that. What he says is when that news crew goes up there, he kind of takes a deep breath. They just put the camera in his face, and he says, Bravo Company 315 Infantry, Hua, and lies down and is quiet. So the last thing, as far as he knew, that he ever wanted anybody to know is who his boss was. He said, if you know nothing else about me, and you saw all this that went on, the most important thing you need to know is, this is my unit. That was the most important thing to him as he may be laying on his deathbed. Is that it may not, in other words, what's going through his mind, there's a lot going on here, and there's camera crews, there's enemy and everything like that. What I want you to know is who I work for, who is my boss. That's what I want you to know. Who are my buddies? Who did I fight maybe to the death with? So I tell folks I have a couple of tests. When people come into me and say, hey, sir, this is a crisis, and what are we going to do? So like that, I'm like, hey, get Carson on the phone. You know, the specialist Carson test, is this really a crisis? The other test, and God, hopefully we never have to do this, because probably most of us would fall short, is that the soldiers that work for us is the most important thing on their mind to tell people that you're their boss. Are they that proud of you? Are they that proud of your unit that the most important thing for them to do when maybe they only have a chance to say one more thing in their life is to say that I work for you. They are my boss. I tell you, if you can pass the specialist Carson test and the private Nauman test, you're going to be a hell of a platoon leader. Okay, you are going to be a hell of a lieutenant. And you don't have anything to worry about. And you'll be a hell of an officer. And I'll tell you what, from what I know about you all and what I've seen just in the short time I've been here talking to people, probably more than you think would pass that test. Probably more than you think would pass that test today without even going to BOLC. Now, we're not going to let you out of BOLC. But probably more than you think would pass that test today. And I can tell you what, and we're talking to a bunch of folks, and that the majority of the folks they go to school with, aren't going to the Army and stuff like that. That's the one thing about the Army. Those are two tests I don't think any other profession out there would pass probably ever. Okay, that is one of the significant things about the Army beyond what I told you. That is what's unique about the Army. That's the kind of test we're being held to. Okay, the Carson and Nauman test. It's not annual earnings, dividends, etc. like that. Okay, our board of directors is Carson and Nauman. That's who we have to answer to. Those are the tests that we have to pass. What I'd like to do is open up to questions now.